Our last segment of the Symposium of Theology and Falsification rests with Mitchell. There is one more section that you may read, but it is not required for this section, where Flew comes back and responds to everyone once more. In this section, Mitchell addresses the idea of the problem of evil as the theologian must confront it, or the person of faith must confront it. He says that Flew has a very valid point if the theologian looks at the problem of evil and says, there is no problem here. He says that if someone were to disregard the problem of evil, then Flew might very well be right. However, he says that Mitchell says that the person of faith is generally a bit more astute than this. He says that the person of faith may believe in God, may believe that God loves, and may believe that God loves us the same way that a father loves his children, and hold that as theological language, yet still see that evil happens, and this does not look good for the theologian's position. It says that if the theologian recognizes that evil is a problem, and a problem for the theist's perspective, that is, then there's something more going on here. He relates this to his own parable. And this parable is about a partisan in wartime. There is a resistance going on in whatever country this is that he's made up. And some of these freedom fighters are sitting around a campfire, and a stranger walks up who claims to be part of the resistance, and in fact, the leader of the resistance. And the stranger departs, and the partisan never sees him again in such intimate circumstances. Now, sometimes the partisan will ask for help from the stranger, and the stranger helps. Sometimes he asks for help, and the stranger does not help. Other times, the stranger is seen in the uniform of the enemy, and is seen helping the enemy, and is even seen handing over some other freedom fighters. Now, this provokes some discussion amongst the partisan and some of his comrades. Some will say that the stranger is on our side. They see the help that they get, and they have the perspective, this conviction that the stranger is really there for their aid, and believe. Now, this does not mean that they disregard the fact that they've seen the stranger helping the enemy. It just means that they've evaluated the situation and come to their statement of faith. Similarly, people of faith, speaking of God in this respect, will see that evil happens. They will see that the problem of evil does pose the question as to God's love, or the question of God's power, or the question of God's existence. However, this does not mean that their faith should be disregarded. In fact, he says there are three possible alternatives to seeing evil. One is that the person may disregard their religious statements altogether, that they may abandon any concept that they had of a loving and powerful or existent God. Second alternative is that they may take it as a statement of faith that God exists, that a loving God and powerful God exists. But there are these other things that they see in the universe that still are recognized as a problem for the theist. Despite the problem, despite the evidence against their position, they still believe. There is a third alternative, and that alternative is some people may see the problem of evil and then make up what he calls vacuous formulae, meaningless statements to try to explain away the problem. Anyone who says, oh, this problem of evil really isn't a problem if you look at it this way, then they're failing to struggle with the problem itself and have reduced their theological position to vacuous formulae, meaningless positions.